Hello. Good evening. Thank you for coming. So I'm just here to welcome you to the College of Southern Maryland. This Connections reading for this evening. It's the second of three this semester. We have one more in May 4th. Will be the literary magazine reading. And in addition to that, we have a program on April 14th at the Calvert County Art Gallery. And there are flyers, little cards like this on the table out in the hall if you'd like to take a look at those. So very active, and it's just such a pleasure to welcome Nickole and Jessica to CSM. And I'll get out of the way and let Rachel introduce them.
Very nice, thank you. Okay, so I've been working, finding an angle for my students with Nickole and Jessica's work, and I think I found one that was very relatable, not only for their work, but for our lives. Some of you may know Chimamanda Adichie's lecture, TED lecture, The Danger of a Single Story. And in it she says, when we realize that there is never a single story about anything, we regain a kind of paradise. Tonight we come together for more than one story, because as Adichie also points out, all of these stories make us who we are. It is true that several stories, several voices are more powerful than one. It is also true that literature offers the genuine, authentic story. Stories that offer more than what we assume to be true, more than stereotypes. And this we need maybe more than ever, to hear every detail, to become aware of new perspectives, to understand the story's beginning, middle, and end. We certainly need to hold on tight to the several stories that make us America. Not the single story we are living now. Neglectful politics, guns, a separate nation. We need to listen to every backstory before coming to conclusions and agreeing with biases. The night before the shooting at Great Mills High School, I sat with my daughter, almost 13, excited for the March 24th March for Our Lives in DC. I sat with her explaining the signs we would make, the chance we might learn, the change we would be a part of. My daughter told me she was too afraid to go to DC, too afraid someone with a gun would show up and shoot. The next day, she'd have even more reason to be afraid of that single story. And this is a part of my daughter's story now. This is the story of every child in America now. But she'd rather, I tell you, her grandmother calls her Sugar Bear, that she's wearing braces now, that for 2 weeks she ate mashed potatoes, that she's on the track team, that her hair is long and beautiful, and when the wind blows, hearts melt. She didn't go to the march, chose a birthday party instead. But I did, and I took my son and his friend, and I was witness to many stories we need to hear. I was not alone. We know how important it is. We know adding a voice makes the choir stronger. Tonight, we meet Nickole Brown and Jessica Jacobs. I think the happiest couple I've ever seen. Two poets to add to the choir. Their stories that in no way fit into a single story. Fanny, Nickole's grandmother, in Nickole's book, Fanny says, is in no way the single story of a grandmother. She's not the cookie baking, blanket knitting, silver-haired cheek pincher. And Jessica's story of self-discovery is not the single story of girls. It is not young girl gossip of cute boys, or one day you'll meet the man of your dreams. No, her story is one day you'll meet the woman of your dreams. We need these stories. My story, my daughter's story, your stories. We need stories of hope and paradise. And for tonight, poetry will give us just that. Welcome, Jessica.
like a poem to start us off. Thank you, Rachel. I just want to start by thanking Rachel and Neil and just all of the faculty and students that have welcomed us here and who were out this afternoon. I think, just to get up on a soapbox for a second, the fact that you all are here, right, and that you're here despite all of the really scary things that are happening at Great Mills all around the country is important. And I just want to share with you something that has really helped Nickole and me. Pretty soon after the election, we were having a really hard time. And, you know, whatever your political feelings, like, there's a lot going on right now. And we had dinner with a poet named Eleanor Wilner, and she's been through a lot. She's, I think, in her late 70s. And we just said, you know, how do we do this, right? Because we don't feel like poetry matters. And what she said to us was that our responsibility as writers, yes, we need to write about the scary things and we need to write about what's going on right now, but we also have to write about love. And we also have to write about, you know, what it smelled like when the sun was out today and everything is in bloom. Because what we're doing as artists is we are creating artifacts for people, even in times of great difficulty, to look at and to say, these are the things that matter, right? These are the things that are worth fighting for, that are worth not giving into despair for. And those words just have really gotten me through some hard times, so I share them with you. And now I'm going to try to read a funny poem, which was probably a bad idea. But okay, I'm going to start with an apology. I need you to take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine middle school. Yes. Okay, so that is the apology. I'm so sorry. So I don't know about your middle school, but mine was not a good experience. And for me, I had a student who asked like what our early childhood was like this afternoon. And I was in middle school in like the early 90s. And this was when mall bangs were really big. Does anyone know mall bangs? It was like you would take your bangs and you would use like half a can of hairspray, and they would be like this wave on your forehead. And it was Florida, so it was really hot. And by the end of the day, like you get kind of sweaty, and it would just sort of collapse into like a forehead toupee. And it was bad. And I had like an off-the-shoulder shirt. And so of course, this is when my hormones kick in. And I discover sex, which is a bad timing. So middle school, sex suddenly everywhere. In shop class, that redhead with the jumpsuit zippered from throat to crotch, trilling, "Boys, don't touch my zipper," until they trailed her like goslings, transfixed by the shiny metal pull. The couple caught naked in the science building bathroom, backhand whispers of, "But I wouldn't even take my shoes off in there." And how many 8th grade dance parties in a country club boathouse? Some girl in the corner crying about some boy nervously plucking the wails of his corduroys, waves lapping, unheard, but always lapping, as I got freaked by the Pagan Twins to a Boys to Men slow jam. Confused girl meshed between two confused brothers. I tried not to stare at the girls I wished against me instead. And every day, those hallways, crowded cattle chutes, musked up clusters of young bodies, slap of sandals, snap of bra straps, high, sweet stench of Malbot perfume. My nose to the back of another girl's neck, close enough to see a single strand escaped, curling beneath her collar, the gym class dampness between her shoulder blades. Sometimes it was all I could do to keep my clothes on, to keep from moaning aloud. Once a bucket, an occasional embarrassing slosh over the top if jostled. Now a sieve, desire leaking from every pore. Which is why I tried so hard to be harder, to use the world as my whetstone, sharpening myself against each day. My body cried out for armor. Big-boned, broad-shouldered, I was built for it. Forced into a dress with shoulder pads, I was the 80s littlest linebacker. So I began to run, clanking like a tank around cul-de-sacs, began to climb, building biceps strong enough to stiff-arm the world away. Even my heart grew heavy, grew into one more thing to carry. But I made it out of middle school, as did all of you. Congratulations. I fell in love with the person you'll hear up here shortly. Relationships, as I'm sure you all know, are not always easy. And we got together pretty quickly, and so I had a lot to figure out. I thought it was important when I was writing love poems to capture all the great stuff, but then to be really honest and to talk about how difficult entering into that type of sharing could be. In the first fall of our marriage, though I want to give you only kindness, there's often an age between what I want and who I am. Yet how many times can you cry on my chest before something good grows there? Redwoods thrive in acid soil. Summon that weight, those stiff-fingered roots to skewer my ribs and prime the rusted pump in my chest. Into that age, let me grow. A ring for each year, marking boom and drought and flood. Let me anchor further into your roots. Make me part of something greater. Let me grow strong enough that even when fallen, I can be of use to you. Rough lumber for rafters and joists, a roof for the drum of this evening's insistent rain. A cross-section from my trunk set to spin on the phonograph, a record of what has passed, playing the music of what is to come. A song for each year, I'll learn to love you better. Oh, thank you. But then there are really awesome things about marriage. And sometimes it's really hard. I don't know how many of you are writers or writing students right now. Sometimes it's really easy to write about sad stuff, yes, or angry stuff. But sometimes when you're happy, it's just over in a flash, right? And it's really hard to capture. So I wanted to write an ode. And I thought, what better thing to write an ode to than my wife's awesome hair? So this is always the point where she's like, don't look at me. I don't want you to see me. All right, and it begins with a quote from Pablo Neruda. Other lovers want to live with particular eyes. I only want to be your stylist. Curly, my tangler. Who needs Rumpelstiltskin when such treasure abounds? Her gold woven around my bike gears, tangled in my toothbrush, vining every drain, even sometimes found in my mouth upon waking. And just this morning from the bathroom, she called me in. My mama's the only one who ever brushed out my hair, she said. But you're my wife. You should know. I began at the bottom, her curls separating with the thick sound of good cloth tearing. Do you see why I had no friends when I was little, she asked. Mama brushed out my hair each day before school. It was like that big. I eased my fingers for the first time all the way through, asked how that felt for her. Vulnerable, she said. Shimmering out beneath the overhead light, a climbing of kudzu, a symphony of trumpet vines, her hair revealed itself. It was like Velcro, she said. Anything would stick in it. Bubblegum, spit wads, pencils. I'd come home crying, and Mama would hold my ugly, frizzy head and say, "Baby, they're just jealous," as though her love could make the lie so. When it comes to her mother and I have this kind of love in common. Only now the lie has come to pass. My wife, whose hair is the shade of farm-fresh yolks, the color of things rich on the tongue, whose hair sings the plaintive song of bed springs, whose hair is the drifting smoke from a village of chimneys, corkscrews enough for 1,000 bottles of wine. A ski slope of S-curves, a grove of twirling maple keys, every playground slide worth sliding. Before a rapt audience, a company of ballerinas cambers their hands to trace out in the air your hair, my dear Angora goat, my cloud of bats spiraling from the cave. Thank you. You don't have to applaud, it's okay. A question to ask once the honeymoon is over. Big around as my bike helmet and high as my ankle, the box turtle was halfway from my side of the road to the other. The warm sun felt delicious, my legs strong. It was almost to the center line. I hadn't been passed by a car for miles. Figuring if it was still there, I'd pick it up on the way back. I cycled past. Years before, the woman across the street was shaped like that turtle, or more like a toadstool, really, squat bell of a body atop the thin stalks of her legs, milky and bare beneath her frayed black house dress. It hurt her to move, clear even from my second-story window. So she brought her trash out in increments, in small bursting grocery bags. She tossed each out the door onto the porch, then painfully nudged them one step to the next before easing carefully herself down a step at a time. Then she towed them finally, slowly, into a crumpled heap at the curb. I left my window to help her, then took her trash out every week after. That story. I hadn't yet told it to my wife. Had I? But there was the turnaround, quicker than expected, and I spun to find a beat-down bus trailed by all the fuming cars that hadn't passed me. Steadying my handlebars against the wind, I rode back hard, zigging around crushed squirrels and tire-splayed birds. The turtle was just where I'd left it, but with the top of its shell torn away. The dead turtle, a raw red bull, its blood slashing the twinned yellow lines into an unequal sign, as in A is unequal to B, as in thinking about doing the right thing is not the same as doing it. As in, how many times did I watch that old woman shuffle bags down the stairs? Really, how many? Before I went from watching to helping. As in, with my wife beside me, I am the woman who does not hesitate to lay down her bike and give a small life safe passage. As in, I biked slowly home, told no one. As in, will she love me less when she learns I am not equal to the person I am when she is watching? And so you think about marriage at some future date. We'll end with a happier poem. Because you waited for me to fly your first kite. She did. We got to fly Nicole's first ever kite on a mountain in North Carolina on a beautiful sunny day, and there were dogs off leash, and it was glorious. So, because you waited for me to fly your first kite, let our love be this clutch of dogs off leash, the preen and posture, snort and snuffle of saying, I smell you, and therefore know you. The rolling on the backs and bearing of the bellies and the tails, in exaltation of metronomes, keeping time for their joy. If this summer is a body, let me be its tongue, tasting the green tang of the spittlebug nests, foaming the oat grass, the iron of this good dirt, a tongue to lick the salt from your upper lip, the rosary of sweat risen on your chest, a tongue to tap the top teeth and suck back like a wave whose tide rolls out through lips pursed as though for a kiss. Listen again. Thank you. As in, thank you, please, let me be this kite lifting from your hands. Ruffled nylon paradise bird with its taut spine and crossbar, the pop of its ripstop sails, snap of its translucent tails. Give me the grand view, whitewater and mountains, but mostly of you. Head thrown back, face to the sun, holding my trace line, tethered to you always, responding to the slightest tick of your fingertips. Let me be a kite that trusts itself to the sky. Yes, gravity is inevitable as death, but why let that desecrate even a moment of this flight? Thank you.
I hate following you. Thank you, Neil. Neil, Rachel, thank you so much. This has been such a sweet and warm landing in Maryland. The students I met earlier with all of your questions, it's a good place. And look at this full room. This is nice. Thank you for coming out. I'm going to read a handful of poems about my grandmother. It's from a book called Fanny Says, and what you need to know is that my grandmother was from Kentucky, particularly Bowling Green, which is in western Kentucky, and she was a rather short lady when she began in the morning, but she would put on a Fredericks of Hollywood push-up bra, her fake eyelashes. She would tease her hair, put on a wiglet, and then tease her hair some more. And when she was done, she was not so short anymore. She drove a car that was about as long as this room. It was a white Cadillac Eldorado, and if you need proof, there is a photo of it on the back of my book. It was always white, as many Cadillacs as she had. They always had red leather interior, like that bright atomic red, like the color of your sweatshirt interior, and she would take out those factory mats and put in white shag carpeting. This is who raised me. So, needless to say, she had a lot to say. And I wrote this book because, just like you're talking, Rachel, about that one story idea, I didn't want her story to disappear. She only made it to probably about 7th grade. She got married when she was 15. And I knew when she passed in 2004, if I didn't start writing down her stories, well, then the people who remembered her might hold on to them for a little while, but then she too would disappear. So I'm going to start with her voice because it's only fair. And I'm going to start with a piece that I didn't necessarily write. I just wrote it down. And what this piece is essentially a collage of the advice that she gave me as a young woman growing up. And I see a lot of young women in the audience, so y'all listen to what Fanny might just have to say to you. I won't read them all because you might leave. I'll read just a small handful of them. It's called Fanny Says How to Be a Lady. So are you ladies listening to my grandmother? All right. Number 1, never tell your age. If under cardiac arrest and the ambulance comes, the paramedic will ask lots of questions. The city you live in, the president, your last name. Answer him best you can, but if he asks the year you were born, say, "You're the doctor here. If you're so fucking smart, why don't you tell me how old I am?" And that is a true story. 2, take it easy. Keep your feet up. And don't carry nothing heavy unless you want your uterus to fall out on the hot sidewalk. And if you lift weights, you'll lose your perky breasts. You won't be left with a titty one. Trust your grandmama. Stay away from the gym. Because like I say, I don't believe in exercise. No, not one bit. 3. And I was just talking about this one this afternoon with, I want to see if she's still here. I don't see her. Oh. 3, don't fool with the boy with no home training. If he pulls in front of the house and lays on the horn, don't you answer. You ain't no whore. He needs to come to the front door proper and knock. And when you get to his car, Grandma will be watching to see if he opens the passenger side. If not, you stand still. Let him jump in alone. Soon enough, he'll notice you're not in the car and come around to open your door. I mean it. I'll be watching, and if you so much as touch that handle, I'm coming out to whoop your ass. A man will respect you once you've earned it. Start a puppy early, and he won't pull the leash. And I'll end with one more, and I think it's really important right now. Lady or no, you need to hear this one. I hold on to this one a lot. She said this to me many times, and this was actually one of the last things she said to me. She said, be mean and fight for it. That's the only way it will ever come to you. Remember what Grandma tells you. People will only take what you let them, and you hold that head back and walk straight. You understand? Be mean. Fight for it. Hold that head back. Walk straight. You'll remember what I tell you. You'll remember, won't you? So that's her. That's her talking. And she did a whole lot of talking, and she gave me my first language. And she taught me how to tell a story, and I think more than anybody, she taught me how to write. And really didn't read and write herself. This poem is called Fuck. My apologies. Fuck is what she said, but what mattered was the tone. Not a drive-by spondy and never the fricative connotation as verb, but from her mouth, voweled, often preceded by well, with the U low, as if dipping up homemade ice cream, waiting to be served last, so she'd scoop the fruit from the bottom where all the good stuff had settled down. Imagine, not a word cold-cocked or screwed to the wall, but something almost resigned. A sigh, And oh well, the F word made so fat and slow it was basset hound. Chunky with an extra syllable, just enough weight to make a jab to the ribs more of a shoulder shrug. Think of what's done to shit in the South. This is shit, but flicked with the whip, made a little more tart. Well, fuck, Betty Sue. I never did see that coming. Can you believe? Or my favorite, not as explicative, but noun. Fucker, she said, but what she meant was darlin', sugar pie, sweet beets, a curse word made into a term of endearment, as in, come here, you little fucker, and give your grandma a kiss. If the child was young enough for diapers, he'd still be a shit ass, but big enough to lift his arms and touch his hands together over his toddling toe head. He was so big, all grown, a cute little fucker. Watch him go. Fuck is what she said, but what she needed was a drum, a percussion to beat story into song, a chisel to tap honey from the meanest rock. Not just fuck if I know, or fuck me running, or fuck me sideways, or beats the fuck out of me, but said tender, knowing there was only one thing in this whole world you needed to hear most. You fucker, you. Don't you know there wasn't a day when you weren't loved? If you still don't understand, try this. A woman up from poor soil, bad dirt, pure clay. A woman as succulent, something used to precious little water, hard sun. Rock crop, maybe, threading roots to suck nutrients from the nothing of gravel, the nothing of stone, a thriving thing, sturdy, thorned, green, out of mere spite. And because you least expect it, laughing, cussing up a storm. My grandmother who didn't ask for power, but took it in bright, full, fuck it all bloom. So I don't exactly know how old my grandmother was at any time in her life, and I don't exactly know when she got married, other than that she was about 15. But she did tell me that the first date that my grandfather took her on was to go see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when it was in the movie theater. Can you imagine, right? And of course, this was Western Kentucky. This was during the Depression, right? This is a tough time. And this poem is about that time. It's called Your Monthly. Your monthly is what her mama called it. But what I want is a word for the year she bled freely. A wad of old wash rags, each end pinned to a belt around her waist. A word for 12 happy deaths, each unfertilized cell that washed out saying, not yet, Fanny, you still just a child yourself. Because this world knows a girl of 14's too old to be playing cowboys and Indians, but also knows how young she was when, stiff red feather in her hair, she scrambled inside, hollering, Mama, come quick, I'm about to bleed to death. A word for the year she learned to walk in red shoes pulled from some rich lady's trash. The sound of those heels down the hall, 2 guns cocking with quick clicks. A sound to hide from her daddy in the morning, eating his breakfast of milk and corn pone with a spoon. A word for the time before a man swaggered in, bought her a dime store Coke, bought her her very first bra, then took her to the picture show to see a cartoon with dwarves impossibly happy to be working the mines. A year later, she was expecting. Though what exactly I was expecting, she told me, I couldn't have said. A word, please, somebody, give me, for that season with her uterus small and tight as an inedible green pear, her body keening and cramped in its stall. A word for all things not yet stretched to bits. A word for all things not yet broken. A word for all things left unbroken. A word for breakable yet unbroken things. A word for unbroken, expectant things. Tell me, what is that word? So I'm going to skip ahead to the last section of the book. And that is the section of the book where I deal with her passing. I was with her as much as I could possibly be during those last weeks, and without a doubt, it was one of the best times in my life. I know that sounds crazy, but she would sit up in the middle of her bed, in the middle of her living room, and all she had left was talk. So she would tell her stories again and again and again. If y'all have a grandparent and you don't have their stories, go get them. Go record them. Listen to everything they have to say. And of course it meant too that we did a whole lot of laughing, right? She had a big popcorn bowl that she would keep next to her bed with all of her hair rollers in it. And underneath those hair rollers was her German Luger. And she would often pull out the gun and threaten whoever was ever coming to the front door. That was a good time right there. And she would cuss at me and make, she could see me, where she sat, she could see into the kitchen. So she would tell me what to cook, but as I was cooking, she would tell me how to cook it. Does anybody have that, grandmother? Right, you ain't doing it right. That ain't how you make cornbread. You ain't doing it right. So, anyways, this poem is about that time. And it deals with a word called flitter. Anybody ever heard that word before? No, I'm too far north. So in Alabama, there are some people who know that word, right? Found a couple people in Mississippi who know that word. I think they're relatives, but I have yet to confirm. All right. Flitter is what she said, but what she meant had nothing to do with the lighting from one bloom to the next by a monarch or an equally colorful diva at the bar. What she meant was your privates, your girly parts, something you better soap up daily and watch like a spectacled hawk. It was code, really. A kid-friendly word like every Christ-fearing family has, something to sidestep the gynecological genitals in its speculum-chilled vagina, something that wasn't her sex, a word that said Colette, both verb and noun exhaling the same thin, gentlewoman cigar. Hers was a word rated PG, something that wasn't once an innocent kitty in boots that now swung practically buck naked from a pole, and never do you hear flitter in any bass-thumping, salt and pepper, my mango vajayjay songs. Y'all don't be too quiet now. I got to get through this poem, please. All right? Don't do it. No, flitter is lyrical but awkward, despite its featherweight meaning. It never does fly. What kept it alive was that F sound, slightly transgressive, ready to leap off the 4-letter cliff, but more so it echoed with fat and flat, 2 qualities of flitter Fanny found. A baby girl, for example, was always born with a fat flitter, and that's exactly what she would be called. Then there was fat as a flitter, applying to cute, chunky things like chipmunk cheeks and toddler's wrists and puppy dogs. Then, of course, there was flat, a more mature version of the same, and if you did enough crunches, yes, your belly would be flat as a flitter. The similes can go on, as carbonated beverages can go flat as a flitter, as can your hair on a humid day. And if you drive west, all that land, you got it, flitter flat. My favorite times with the word were the last days we had her, when she needed oxygen and ice chips and kept death backed into a corner by calling me a flitterhead. I swore I didn't have her remote, and she didn't believe me until she found it under the covers between her legs. She changed the channel, said, "Okay, flitterhead, I'm sorry." Right there was the clicker, right under my flitter. Who would have thought? And when it was time to change her, to wipe off the blackest stool with a warm cloth, she kept me from deep sorrow by saying, "Make sure to hit my bald flitter now. Nobody tells you every hair falls out down there as you age. And hit it with a dose of powder, Coey. Grandma's got to stay fresh." I cleaned her as I would a baby, turning her best I could from side to side. And later, when I tired, I called in the nurse to help me hold her so I could change the sheets. The nurse was from an island not far from Florida, but far enough that when our work was done, she stopped me, asked, "I'm sorry, your grandmother. I can't understand her. Can you tell me what language she speaks?" It was then I knew. I wasn't losing my grandmother, no. I was losing my home. The one place I could understand the world through a mother tongue only she could sing. And I'm going to read just 2 more poems. This next poem, well, I got to read after Jessica read all those poems, even though someday I'm going to straighten my hair before reading. It's just going to totally mess up your set. Just wait. Takes me 3 hours to do it, but I'm going to do it. So Jesse and I married in 2013, which was almost a full 10 years after I had lost Fanny. And one of the great regrets I have is that I didn't have the opportunity to call Fanny and say, I think I got it right this time. I think I got it, right? Because she saw me through all kinds of heartbreaks, you know. And I think she would have given me hell, right? Because she didn't see me come out, you know. But I also know, I know in my heart she would come around. And that's what this poem is about. It opens with an epigraph from a poem by Marianne Moore. And that poem is called "What Are Years?" And Marianne wrote, "Satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy. This is mortality. This is eternity." Now I'm going to let you hear that one more time just so I can pretend like I'm Marianne Moore up here and I can write that well. Satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy. This is mortality. This is eternity. An invitation for my grandmother. When Mama called to say you were gone, I was in New York and climbed the impossible top of a brownstone to talk myself down. Don't get sentimental. Dying is what grandmothers do, was what I told myself. But what I should have done was invite you there with me. You've never been further north than Cincinnati, and the view, the spatter and fleck of all those lights, you'd have to see to believe. So now that you're on the other side and got your knees working again, a proposition. Come, lace up your kids, walk with me a while. I won't say the world's better, it's not. Since you left, I've seen a pelican stretch her wings to dry, the dripping petrol making her into a bent crucifix of oil. And the penguins have dropped their proud eggs into melted ice. In this spring, yet another wind bulldozed my neighbors, all their homes razed to slab foundation, their trees now splintered bone. But we can take a train out of here. Come, sit next to me, because out the window a girl on a horse jumps a junkyard fence. She wears a shirt the color of poppies, of bright soda cans, and I bet you'll agree, blurred, it is a brown pony with red wings. And 3 years ago, can I take you there? My sister, sitting up during a contraction, how she reached inside herself to touch the crown of her son, not yet born. I want to show you the look on her face, and that cord cut a rich earth of blood, a thick black joy. And please, take off your shoes now. Stand with me. Last October, when I took a wife, barefoot in the grass, we made our vows, and after, when she held my jaw with both hands, I could feel the bones of my skull rising up to make a face finally seen. And I'm going to end with a poem about my grandmother's perfume, which was very strong. Does anyone know what Nickole smells like? No one remembers. It's been gone for a long time. For my grandmother's perfume, Nickole. Because your generation didn't wear perfume, but chose a scent, a signature. Every day you spritzed a powerhouse floral with top notes of lavender and mandarin. A loud smell, 1 part Doris Day, that girl next door who used Technicolor to find a way to laugh about husbands screwing their secretaries over lunch. The rest all Faye Dunaway, all high drama extensions of nails and lashes, your hair a breezy fall of bangs, a stiletto entrance that knew to walk sideways, hip first. Now, watch a real lady descend the stairs. Launched in 1968, Nickole was the 1950s, tingling with the beginning of disco. Nickole was a housewife tired of gospel, mopping her house to Stevie Wonder instead. You wore so much of it, tiny pockets of your ghost lingered hours after you were gone. And last month, I stalked a woman wearing your scent through the grocery so long I abandoned my cart and went home. Fanny, tell me, how can manufactured particles carry you through the air? I always express what I see, but it was no photo that stopped and squeezed me to my knees. After all these years, you were an invisible trace. And in front of a tower of soup cans, I was a simple animal craving the deep memory worn by a stranger oblivious of me. If I had courage, the kind of fool I'd like to be, I would have pressed my face to her small shoulder, and with the sheer work of 2 pink lungs, I would have breathed enough to conjure you back to me. Thank you, guys.
So Neil asked us about what we were working on. So Nickole and I are each going to read just a little sample of some new work for you. For me, I'm just going to read 3 new poems. And how many of you have been in love? Can I get a show of hands? You can have a secret hand in front of you if you, okay. Well, I just want to make you really uncomfortable to start off. For me, being in love had this really weird side effect where all of these questions that I think had lived in me my whole life, love kind of like broke my chest open, and all of a sudden they came out and I had to deal with them. And they were big questions about why we're here. Is God a real thing? Is it something that I want to have a relationship with and believe in? And I had walked away from Judaism, which was how I was raised when I was a kid. So for the last year, I've been reading theology and just kind of thinking about these things. So this first poem, a good friend of mine named Matthew Olsman is writing a collection of letter poems. And he asked me to write him a letter in response in a poem form. So I ended up writing to him about this subject. Letter from Jessica Jacobs to Matthew Olsman requesting discernment. How old were you, Matthew, when the world tipped its hand? When things you thought were natural showed their seams? I was 13. On trucked-in pallets across the street, squares of scotchgrass were stacked high as my head. Did you know a lawn could be delivered? I didn't. But lured by promises of Pepsi and pizza, of doing equal work with the boys, I hauled and placed, puzzling them neat as a sheet of graph paper. The girls that year had begun to paint their faces, a line of cheap orange stark along their jaws. You've seen this, okay. Unlike me, they had not yet learned the art of how to blend. All those boys I pretended to like, all the girls I pretended not to. In thrift stores, we tried on others' past season selves, the clothes like the kids in the hallways, grouped by color and type. We wore masks of slang and song lyrics, dropped band names like currency, smoked skunkweed copped from an older brother's underwear drawer. Mirrors held a special magnetism. Instead of homework, I studied myself. And after school, I walked past the grass, the contrived squares busy stitching and joining into a lawn, passing themselves off like they'd been there all along. But I could still feel the weight of that sod, the wet itch of it on my skin, the wonder that wherever I set it, it would bind itself to the ground below. All day, my neighbors' sprinklers stuttered out rainbows. All night, to the hiss of their groundwater whispers, I traced out my new hips and breasts, the possibilities I might grow into. And now, decades on, I'm trying to grow a lawn on me, transplanting a faith I'm not sure I'll ever own. Heavy with questions, I zip myself into Judaism like a patchwork parka of grass, hoping it might take hold, might grow to fit snug as a golf course greenway. Matthew, I wish you'd been around then to ask. Outside, the lawn, inside me, each carefully constructed as a Lego set, yet also a living, breathing, dying thing. Were both fake just because I'd helped make them? And now, what do you think of this whole religion thing? Will faith always gape like a borrowed coat? If something isn't natural, can it still be true? Sleepwalkers in the garden. At least afterward, Adam and Eve knew what they'd lost, knew their bodies as separate, which gave them something to long for. Knew God, that companion who'd strolled beside them in the appled evenings, as a whispering in the quiet corner of their chests. A new reason to be still and listen. When my grandmother moaned into the pain of her final days, there were her bottom teeth, those pickets, the same irregular pattern as mine. Her eyes the same too, only flecked with the green of new leaves. Why had it taken me until then to see? Paradise is every moment we've ever left. All the small, unnoticed gardens we can never again enter. And this last poem comes from, I've been studying Hebrew for the last 5 months, just so I could kind of approach the text of the Bible, of the Torah, in its original language. And I have this really incredible Hebrew teacher. She's about this tall, and she's super feisty. She's this Israeli woman, and she was a professional dancer. She danced with Merce Cunningham in New York, and she's fantastic. And one of my big questions is, what does it mean to pray? It's this thing that everyone says they do all the time, but how does it work? And so she answered me. Prayer should be a tunnel, my Hebrew teacher says, and I'm a pigtailed kid again, descending from a blazing Florida day to the murky depths of SeaWorld's tunnel of terror, a massive glass passage through a seawater tank. This is a real thing. Sharks glided by, fins foxed and furrowed as the edges of old treasure maps. Far above, the inaccessible surface rippled with a chainmail of light. Prayer should be a tunnel, she says again, making an O of her hands and pushing it out before her. My teacher, also a dancer, uses her body to create structures in the air. It should take you there, she says. English is not her first language, but by there I know she means God. By tunnel, I think she means pipeline, a direct channel in. A sign in line had shown an elephant perched atop one of the tunnel's glass blocks to demonstrate its fortitude, to tell me not to be afraid. But I was. Each shark with its hacksaw teeth was clearly meant for me. And it was only a matter of time before one gnawed its way through, bringing all the water rushing in. And what would happen first, drowning or being devoured? For those like me rooted in terror, a moving sidewalk kept us in motion, easing us through the eerie underpass, acting just like time, which moves us without the need for us to move, which moves us whether or not we want it to. Prayer should be a tunnel, she says, but what words, what melody would let me make with my body such grand architecture in the air? Let me stand in one place and travel both out and in. Let me sink and not drown. Let me wander unafraid into the open mouth and emerge unscathed, yet changed. Thank you.
Just can't get rid of us. I'm just going to read one poem. It's a longer poem, I'm sorry, but it's not too long, I hope. Neil has told me about the shooting that happened here not that long ago. And I think this is the right poem to read for that. So I don't know how you guys feel about the election and what happened, but the day after the election, I do what I've been doing every week since we moved to Asheville, and that is I volunteer at an animal sanctuary, farm sanctuary in particular. And it was so interesting watching the chaos that was happening on the news and seeing the despair come through on my Facebook feed. And then, of course, stepping into the barns that next morning, and the animals were happy to see me, right? I was just bringing them their food. They didn't care. And about the same time, I also started to read a book by a woman named Rebecca Solnit, and it's called Hope in the Dark. And Rebecca gets to something that I think is so important. She says that hope isn't necessarily a thing that you feel. It's something that you do. Really important. The same way that if you think of courage, doesn't mean that you're not afraid. Courage is something that you do when you are afraid, meaning that hope can be something that you do when you feel hopeless. And I think that we've got a lot of things coming our way. We have a lot more bullets coming our way. We have climate change coming our way. We have racial tension here. We have so many difficult things that need to be healed in our country. And so I wrote this poem, and I've dedicated this poem to the two women who run that farm sanctuary. Their names are Trina and Barb. They run Animal Haven Farm Sanctuary in Asheville. And the poem is called Against Despair, the Kid Goat. Reader, meet the two women who sunk everything they had into taking broken animals, the gimpy and oozing critters, the ugly, lopsided, tailless pets, urine-soaked and drooling, zested with fleas, the matted and discarded scrap heaps left growling and bucking, pissing on everything, the good riddance left roped to a chain-link fence. No, I take that back. Instead, I want you to be them. I want you crazy enough to try to fix them, to feed and brush and bathe and dip and sweet milk those beasts whole. I want you to try, to always try, despite the odds, just as you coaxed the docile, fat, blind pig up on legs that eventually broke from his own inbred weight, just as you spritzed the mites off a mangy hen that would be limp in the claws of a hawk later that same day. On the hill, a stubborn but sometimes gentle sheep grows cold under a blue tarp, and in your truck is a towel across the back seat for your favorite but neurotic as hell dog. How you rushed her to the vet only to see her put down. No, let me make this real. Reader, I want you tired, every joint in your body stiff and worn. I want you to finally strip off your filthy clothes. Then I want you jolted from sleep by a cry that in your dreams sounds like an infant wailing, and now awake sounds just the damn same. Now, Find that kid goat bleeding in the grainy dark. He's no bigger than a lap dog, and on his fist-sized head are the buds of his horns, tiny, like 2 popcorn pieces of warm bone, 2 bright spots, the only thing you can see. Flip on the switch. Now you know. With bare hands, I want you to clear the froth from his lolling tongue. I want you to grab a rag, a sponge, the corner of your shirt, anything you can find to sop up the liquid, so much of it you can't tell what's what, be it mucus or bile or vomit or blood, as if every water has been brought up for this giving in, as if his body is already a river and rushing away. Now use your arms. It takes strength to steady the convulsing of a thing this young. And then, once his gaze rolls back to white, you know what to do. You know your job. Push together the furred slits of his lids. Close the extinguished horizons of his eyes. Now, don't play stupid. You knew this was coming. You've seen it enough times. You're not dumb, just desperate to try to save this little meat goat the farmer dumped at your door, too septic and riddled with worms to even be killed to eat. Now get on your knees. Mop it up. As you wring out the rags, don't push away what you know of the sun. Let yourself admit the light, how it made his ears pink and transparent, revealed the secret veins of leaves, how you adored it when they periscoped to your voice and he looked up to give you the small meditations of fresh milk and hay in his mouth. Go on. Get sentimental if you have to. Have a good cry. No one is here, and besides, who would care? Because you try, don't you? You always try. But always that impossible riddle. Always the word riddled with the word worms, as if each whip-like body was curled into a question, a wriggling puzzle, a mob infestation of questions, parasites that love a home so hard they turned that kid goat anemic, fevering, stuttering with a murmuring heart, shitting out a writhing pile of larvae and eggs. Little sips, little hooks, little burrows. This was how, little by little, that little goat finally collapsed, arched his throat back as if to be slit, jerked his legs up into the nothing like the fetus he was just 2 months before. But here is the point. Don't ever let yourself think it didn't matter. It mattered then as it matters now. Because until this morning rose dull on the horizon with this useless, good-for-nothing goat now motionless on your floor, regardless, in spite of, no matter, you fed a beast, worthless, a real lost cause, not unlike this whole stubborn, beautiful, fucked up planet about to seize and drown in its own melt. There really wasn't a thing you could do but admit it. If you knew, if you really could say he would not have died last night, but would certainly die tomorrow, you'd force yourself out of bed and do what it is you do. You'd count his pills, warm his formula over the stove, rake out his soiled pen, and with arms wide you'd bring him a fresh bale of hay. Yes, That's right. Now say his silly goat name. Because, yes, every living thing deserves a name. And you called him Peanut, a playful way to say he was a flake of the size he should have been, so sick he did not jump or play as he should, but leaned his tiny face exhausted into your leg. Now bend to stroke his scrawny goat neck. Say, good boy, Peanut. We've got you now. Now, there, everything's gonna be just fine. You know it's a lie, but no matter. This is your job. It's what you do. It's what needs to be done. Thank you. Oh, Lord.
Go ahead.
No, really. So we met at a terrible party when I was on tour for my first book back in 2007.
Yeah.
2007. Well, and what happened is we promptly stomped on one another's hearts. Not always the most loving couple we were. And I went back to Kentucky. Jesse was in New York City at the time, and we tried for 6 years to be friends. Yeah. So
And then when we realized we were really bad at being friends, we got married 6 months later. So.
So we met in Webster Hall on 10th Street?
11th Street.
11th Street.
Yeah. I will say, though, that Nickole and I got to know each other by writing letters to each other. And I was working in a corporate publishing job, and Nickole wrote these, like, stunning letters that were like poems. And when I wrote back to her, I just couldn't be like, you know, TTYL, like, see, whatever, it's cool. So I had to actually write, which I hadn't really done since college. And it made me remember how much I loved it and how much it mattered. And I ended up quitting my job and going to graduate school for poetry. So she also brought me back to poetry. So. I mean, I think the fact that you're asking the question is really wonderful. To me, like, the best thing that you can do for her is just to listen to her, you know, and to ask her questions, which is a way of saying I love you. And a way of saying, like, I really want to hear what you're going through. And you don't have to give her advice. You know, you just have to be there. And, you know, and if your family, your parents, your grandparents, whatever, are struggling with that, I think giving them the space to talk about that, too, and not getting mad at them. Like, sometimes people have to work through that before they realize, oh, this just means that, you know, maybe this person's life's going to look a little bit different. But especially now, I mean, we can be in love and be married and travel together and, you know, kind of, and be here with all of you. So,
Yeah.
But she's lucky to have you and asking that. Do you want to add?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good answer. Once. We,
Wait, I think
No.
you said, would you?
Oh,
we
would you?
have once, and we probably will again.
when Obama, do y'all miss Obama? Do y'all miss him? When we were legally married. So we got married in California. We were living in Arkansas at the time. So we took a red eye out there, got married, drank our glass of champagne, took a red eye back so we could teach class early the next week. And so we went from being legal to not being recognized at all, like that, as soon as the plane flew over. And when that decision came through, the Oxford American contacted us and asked us if we had anything to say about that decision. And so we co-wrote an essay together. But, you know, in a way, we're always collaborating. You know, she's my first and my best reader. And there's so we have laid claim to certain verbs. She's told me in that poem that I just read, the word periscoped, as used as a verb, is hers. So
I wrote it first, I mean, just to be fair.
but yeah, so we're always leaning into each other for advice. And someday I think those early letters that we wrote back and forth, they might turn into something, but not until we're good and old. And maybe we're almost there. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Once again,
Thank you.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.